everybody. Sylvie here with Walkabout Canine Consulting in the training and behavior community. Welcome. And tonight I was going to talk about leash pulling. That is a popular topic. So I'm not sure if anybody's going to be here, but I look forward to speaking to you. I won't keep you long. It is a beautiful Tuesday evening. I hope you're having a great day. And if pop in any questions that you might have in the chat, as I will be talking about leash walking. And most important and the biggest question I see from clients and looking around on Facebook groups, into other groups, different breed groups, is how do I stop my dog from pulling my arm off? So I don't know if any of you have dogs that are big pullers. If you do, I'd love to hear from you. And it's leashes are one of those tools that dogs don't always know what the heck they're for. So why do dogs pull? Okay. That's a really good question. I'm just checking to see if anybody is here. It's just after 6:30 here anyway, and I'm just going to get started. So why do dogs pull on the leash? Leashes are a very unnatural addition for a dog. They are not born understanding to walk on a leash. That is something that we have, I will use the word that we make them do. Most natural dogs are living freely and are not walking around on leashes, so it is something extra. It is something that the dog is unfamiliar with. And, you know, obviously when we get a dog into our home, we do need to walk them on the leash because that is the law. And of course we want to keep them safe, and we want to keep other people safe and other animals safe too, because we don't need our dogs just running up to whoever or whatever. So what are some of the reasons that our dogs pull on a leash? I always have, anybody who has worked with me, I always, my mantra is walks should be about quality and not quantity, meaning the walk should be a nice walk, no pulling, and we need to ditch that whole concept of I need to take my dog for a long walk. If your dog is pulling and you take your dog for a really long walk, you are creating a nice habit for them, because essentially that's what it is. Dogs will pull forward for a lot of reasons. They are distracted by their environment. If it's a teen dog, then absolutely you're going to see a lot of distractions, because that's just a normal part of the developmental stage. Teen brain, if you can think back of when we were adolescents, everything in the environment was more important than our parents for the most part. So our dogs are really trying to figure things out. They're trying to figure out what's in the environment. But the other thing to think about too is we want to really make sure that we do have the connection, and we keep building that as we're working on our leash walking, no matter how old our dog is. Often you will see smaller puppies be pretty easy on a leash, and that is normal. And I often explain to owners, when they have younger puppies, you're going to see a lot of great behaviors, and that's just, again, their developmental stage, because hey man, they want to be close to you, they want to be close to the family unit, because if they were living in nature, that's pretty much what they would be doing with their mom and siblings. They'd be keeping pretty close, and then once they reach a certain age, they start to explore. So that's what our dogs are doing when they live with us. So it's a really good habit to start thinking of our leash walks in circuits. And when I say circuits, I think most of us who've done any kind of workouts, been to a class or anything, or even at home, that there's something called circuit training where you do little pieces of your exercises in really short little spurts. So we can do the same thing with walks so that we can create success. And we want to start building really good habits as fast as possible. So even if you have a young dog and you have a puppy and they're walking really nice beside you, don't disregard that fabulous loose leash. Reinforce them, because if you give them a piece of their kibble every once in a while they're walking beside you, they are learning that by staying in that proximity zone that they are going to get reinforced. So you're building that behavior. Don't get fooled into and I'm not saying that if your puppy's walking really nice at a really young age that it won't continue, but you want to make sure that it will continue, because there can be changes down the road where your dog wants to pull. The other thing you want to make sure is maybe the environment is really overwhelming and our dogs can't think properly with everything that's going on. There's so many smells, there's so many sights. Still at this time of year we have that. In the wintertime, well, we still have lots of smells in the wintertime because things are wet. If we live in areas that have wet snow, and that often amplifies the smells. Wet amplifies the smells. So that's where you will often see dogs wanting to sniff more after the rain. But again, is the environment overwhelming? So they may just be in overload. That's something that you want to watch for, and that you want to quantify. And when I say quantify, you actually want to measure at what point is it just too distracting for your dog. The other thing that you want to keep in mind is, is your dog confident, and are you confident? We want to be careful about sending the wrong message down the line. And we also want to make sure that we're really clear to our dog. So reinforcements are helpful, and they can be in the form of, their kibble. Can also be in the form of verbal feedback. So don't underestimate the value of that as well. And we do want to keep in mind that we also want to make sure that we have that connection with our dogs, so that we are really important, and that if there are things in the environment that are exciting, we want to be able to get their focus back on us. And sometimes that comes easily or naturally, but often we do need to reinforce that. It's really nice to build a lot of skills. One of the probably the most important foundation skill to teach our dogs is focus. And they don't need to necessarily stare at our eyes, although that's what you end up getting. But I'm just going to use the word focus. So if we don't work on that skill, then we're going to have a really hard time. We want our dogs to learn that being focused on us is a really good deal. It's not something, like I say, it is a skill that we want to teach our dogs. And it's also something that, we want to reinforce, but we want it to be fun. And we don't want to use any kind of reprimands if they're not doing it. Because then you will squash any kind of game that you may have started with your focus game. You can animate yourself while you're playing that so that you make yourself exciting as well. Something that we need to keep in mind is when we're building a focus, we need to build that everywhere we go. So if we have some really great focus inside the house, that's awesome. Now we need to take it on the road. And we want our dogs to learn that when we're in the backyard and there's stuff going on, maybe there's times a day when our backyard is nice and quiet and we can get good focus. But now, hey, the kids are at home after school next door and they may be playing in their backyard. So that's a great opportunity to teach our dogs to be focused on us even when that's going on. There's a ton of ways to build focus. There's a lot of really fun ways to build focus. And if you've taken any of my classes, I usually teach owners that, because we do want it to be fun. And fun is rewarding. So always think about that. And also every time we go to a new place. So if we walk out our front door, do we have our focus before we leave our house? We need to have that focus before we walk out the door. We need to have that focus the second we walk out the door. So if our dogs are really excited about what is going on outside that front door. For some dogs, that is just who they are. If we can get them to focus on us as soon as we pass through the door, that's great. There's some dogs that they just naturally need to scan. That's part of who they are. But if we can get them focusing on us right away before we even move forward, that is a really good step to practice. And then as we start moving with our dogs, that we can stop and build that focus as we're walking our dog. So it's nice to add in a lot of skills in our walk. I see there's somebody watching here, so if you want to say hi, love to say hi. If not, that's fine. So we are talking about leash walking, leash pulling, why dogs do that, and looking at some foundation exercises for leash walking that can help us be successful. So I see a lot of owners reaching for fast tools, and if that's what I don't condone that. It's not something that I think is a good deal for our dogs. And if you're working with somebody who tries to or does convince you that certain metal tools are the only way to go, then perhaps they just don't understand or have lots of knowledge in regards to training different ways. So I know I have to hold my breath when I watch pet owners talking about prong collars. I did share something on this group about prong collars and some of the severe damage that it can do. Now, doesn't mean that it always does extreme physical damage, but there is definitely mental damage, and there are some. Like I say, it's a quick tool. I'm not going to say that it doesn't work. It doesn't work all the time. I've seen tons of people walking around with pinch collars and their dogs are still pulling them. So it's something that you want to think about mentally. So if it's not a good feeling to have around their neck, regardless if they have fur or not. It's a pretty sensitive area. And that feeling can, over time, be very frustrating. Yes, there are dogs that are a little more resilient, happy-go-lucky, but it's just not something that I choose to do. If you use one and you want to learn, different ways, that's what I teach owners. And there are some great ways. I've had people try and convince me that why they need to use those tools. And I do have a background with, first of all, I have a background with learning and understanding how the training works. But I've worked, I've volunteered, and I have worked in shelters, so I've handled some pretty crazy dogs. And you can teach them to walk on the leash if you're willing to put the time in and have the patience and give them that opportunity to learn. Because really that's what it is. It's an opportunity for them to learn. And so that, yeah, so I don't use those tools. Like I say, if you want to learn how to do better with different ways, then I love to show owners how you can teach your dogs a different way. Something to remember is that dogs can't talk to us, so even though you think your dog is doing fine on an aversive tool, because that is essentially how they work. It's aversive, it's stopping behavior, and that's what punishment does. And it doesn't mean that they're not making associations all the time. It could actually lead to frustration, anxiety, fear, and you know, we need to be careful about the associations that dogs are making as well. When I grew up as a trainer, choke collars were really big, and that was, at least where I am here, I know pinch collars have been around a long time, but they've actually become really popular of late, which is sad to see. But yeah, so when you know better, you do better. So getting back to actual teaching is we want to teach our dogs proximity as well. We want to teach them that being close to us is a really good deal, and reinforcements build behavior. So like I say, there's lots of ways to do that. We can use our dogs' calories. We can use toys if our dogs really love toys. We can use little games. We can use movement. We can use running. And a lot of dogs really get off on that depending on your breed and breed group that your dog comes from. So I don't know if anybody has any questions. So I'm getting to go through some of the points that I wanted to point out. And again, you know, we want to make sure that we have the connection with our dog, that when we're going out, it's like, yeah, it's a good deal. I'm with my person and this is really, really cool. Does it mean they don't get to sniff and enjoy their walk? Absolutely. And often we can get more buy-in when we let our dogs actually enjoy the walk for themselves, as opposed to just walking and not letting them get what they need from the walk. We can certainly teach our dogs that there's certain sections, hey man, let's walk. And then there's other places like, yep, you know, just fill your boots and do some sniffing. I've had lots of success with clients' dogs who just wanted a little bit more leash and just wanted to do a little bit more sniffing. And that gave them the satisfaction, and you know, the pulling stopped. It's not, you know, always that way, but just looking at you know, what the dog really needs. Also being really clear. So if we're always changing the rules on the dog, it's really hard for them to understand what you want. So making sure you do have that positive feedback. You don't need to worry about telling the dog when they're doing something wrong. You know, if we can set up the situation for them to get really good feedback, then that's enough. Reprimands sometimes become a little bit naggy, and we can, for some dogs, and depending on their personality, actually lose them by placing too much pressure on them if we want to add a lot of you know, negative feedback. So that's something to think about, and focusing on their great choices that they are making while they're walking. Like I say, there's lots of ways to reinforce that, and And also, you know, you want to think of building habits. We all know what a habit is. We all know that we get into good habits and we get into bad habits, and it's overlearning, and that's why habits are hard to break. So it's really great if we can actually build a good habit, get that overlearning right from the get-go for our dogs for leash walking. Okay. And like I say, focus is a really big part of building that connection. If you don't have it, then you know that might be a skill that you want to spend the next 3 weeks working really hard to get and then start to maintain. Like I say, there are, you know, lots of environments you want to practice. There's lots of also variables as far as distractions. So being able to practice this, hi Henrik, no problem for being late. I'm glad you're here. And just getting to the end of the leash walking. If you have any questions, throw them in there. I'm not just talking about foundations, focus, and connection with our dogs. And, you know, if we don't have focus, then it's going to be really difficult. Pretty much everything else that you do with your dog, if you don't have focus as your foundation, you're going to have a hard time with a lot of different behaviors. Because, like I say, it is a really good core foundation. It's also, you know, like I say, it's really a ripple effect on the rest of their behaviors. So if we can do that, then that is going to, you know, is really going to help you with everything, and just, again, creating these little skills as habits. And if we can look at, you know, building, focus on the dog and the surroundings as well. Yeah, so actually having the dog learn to focus on us in many different surroundings for that connection when we're walking them on a leash. Same thing is if we have our dogs off leash. In this country, we have leash laws, so we don't really have a lot of places where we're allowed to let our dogs off unless we go to dog parks, and that's a totally different scenario. But even if our dogs are off leash, we still need to have some sort of connection. We still need to have our foundation for focus. Yeah, our dogs are gonna sniff, but we really want our dogs to focus on us here and there, even when they're off leash, right? So yeah, being able to build that as, you know, doesn't matter how old your dog is, but if you've got a young dog, start building that right away. If you've got a puppy, start building that right away. Doesn't matter if they're 8 weeks, 12 weeks, 16 weeks, do it now. And it will be really helpful as your puppy is growing up and as they go through the different stages, as I mentioned before. As teenage dogs really love external environment, and yes, we want them to enjoy things. We want them to enjoy sniffing and everything. So that's pretty much what I wanted to talk about. Nobody is oh, the other thing I did want to mention too is pulling is also a natural opposition reflex. So once they start to pull, that reflex starts to build as a strong habit. As I mentioned, habits become very powerful. And so if we keep pulling on that pressure and they keep pulling against it, you know, you could be building more of more pulling in regards to the leash. So you want to be careful about that. I like to teach dogs how to give into that leash pressure, and that's pretty easy to to teach. So that's just another little exercise that I like to teach our dogs. So we're coming up on 25 minutes, and if anybody has any questions, please let me know. If you're watching this on replay, if you can put hashtag replay, I love to see that people are watching and getting some value from my Tuesday evening chats. If anybody has any questions, or if there's other topics that you want me to spill the beans on in regards to, you know, how I proceed in regards to training. Everybody has their own way. I've been around a long time, so there's no way you'll ever convince me to use aversive tools. Like I say, I've handled some pretty crazy dogs. Yeah, I've handled some big, crazy dogs that used to roam free, or not feral, but one part of the country that I lived, they came off the reservation, so they were used to doing whatever they wanted to because they typically run free. So you can teach a dog without aversive tools. So I know I talked about tools in one of my other talks, and I did talk about the head halter, and it is in my toolbox, but to be honest, I probably haven't pulled it out of my toolbox in a really, really, really long time. And it always depends on also, you know, not just the dog, but the client that I have. I use that more as a safety tool if I have somebody that, for safety reasons, it's you know, just something that they need to use. But your harnesses are going to be really helpful for that, especially the 2 points of contact, and which there are plenty of great ones that will help you there. It just gives you better balance. Can you tell us more about them later? What am I telling you about them later? Yeah, so I know there's a little bit of backlog. So that is what I wanted to cover tonight in the live. My dogs. Oh, yeah. So my former dogs. Yeah. Yeah. So it's more so just dogs that I've handled just through work. Like I say, volunteering at shelters, working at shelters, and having dogs that aren't familiar with a leash at all and is totally foreign. And you know, sometimes they're just like a alligator, or do an alligator roll. So, but anyway, so thank you very much. If you've watched this, if you have any questions, please let me know. And I hope you have a great evening. I am going to, we have some sunshine here, and it's starting to cool off our fall nights, but I love that. Can I talk about shelter dogs? Yeah, I can if you want to. I'm not sure anybody else wants to hear about that. There's really pretty much, you know, how I train is, you know, how I would go about that as well. So if you have something specific, Henrik, you can let me know in regards to shelter dogs and what you want me to say about that. I don't work with shelter dogs anymore, but you know, there was a period that I did. There's also a period that I worked with other species, and essentially just always applying the science of learning, and then also, you know, just thinking about the animal that's in front of you and making sure that you know, that you're helping them. So right, I am going to say goodnight. Everybody have a great rest of your week, and I will say goodnight.